I love the piece in the Gazette about the gondola.
Thanks, Michael.
I don't know if he's kidding or if he's.
I'd love to see one.
Somebody check his tea, quick.
The meeting is live and ready to go whenever you are.
Okay, great. Thank you, Marcy. It is 6:30, so I will call to order the Monday, January 11th, regular council meeting. I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the shared traditional lands of the Coast Salish people. I am looking for approval of the near-term, long-term, and regular council meeting agendas, please. That is moved by Councillor Logan. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Kobayashi has seconded it. Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing no hands, I will call the question. Those in opposition. Oh, I'm sorry. Wait a second. Sorry, I do see a hand. My apologies. Councillor Parkinson.
Sorry, Your Worship, I need to be retrained after a break over Christmas. So get hand up.
No, that's all right. I'm feeling the same way. I also think that possibly Zoom has upgraded because it doesn't look exactly the same way it looked before. So we all have a bit of a curve today.
Yeah.
I guess I just had a question on the public hearing on January 25th at 5 p.m. And I wondered what the thinking was behind a 5 p.m. public hearing. I don't think I've come across that time frame before.
I will look to staff, but I'll give you a quick answer to that. Normally, Councillor Parkinson, what we do is we try and we know we have a council meeting usually at 6:30, and so what we do is try and push it back as far as possible, depending on how engaged we believe the community will be. So if there's only one or two people that we're expecting to actually make a comment, we might have that meeting at 6. If we are expecting that there's going to be a fair amount of people wishing to comment, we make it earlier. And so we just continually push it back depending on the anticipated participation. But I will, Mr. Earl, would you like to comment on that, or does anybody else have
Thank you, Your Worship. That is exactly the reason. Just staff trying to anticipate how much time will be needed for the public hearing in advance of the regular council meeting.
Anything else, Councillor Parkinson?
No, I'm good.
Okay. I'm not seeing any other hands, so I'll call the question. Those in opposition to the near-term, long-term, and regular council meeting agenda? Seeing none, the motion passes. Moving on to 3, public participation. There is no public who have registered to speak, and I did confirm that with staff just before we started the meeting. Moving on to Mayor's message. I don't have any comments tonight other than to just say welcome to 2021, everyone. And I look forward to a very productive year as a council. I think we have a lot of work to do this year, and I'm very excited about the prospects that are out there. So moving on to 5, adoption and the receipt of minutes. This is for the regular council meeting minutes of December 14th. Moved by Councillor Kobayashi. Looking for a seconder, please. I will second it just to keep us moving. Is there discussion? I'm going to lower everybody's hands. Sorry, I'm going to lower hands one more time. Is there discussion? Please put up your hand. Councillor Baxter, I saw your hand go up. Did you have discussion?
No, I was trying to second it, but I was way too slow.
Okay, thank you. Not any discussion, so I'm going to call the question. Those in opposition, please raise your hands. Nobody opposes. Thank you. Moving on to 6, new business. This is Mr. Borhill, who is our Director of Community Planning, Heritage, and this is a Heritage Vision Statement recommendation and 2020 end of year update. And as you recall, we all pushed this back from our December 14th, and hence the reason why it's the update for end of year. Mr. Borhill.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll just take a moment to share my screen. So the staff report before you provides the Heritage Commission's recommended vision statement and an outline of 2020 accomplishments, as well as what's proposed for 2021 within the Heritage Planning Service Area. We've got time tonight, so if council would like to interject, I know it's not committee of the whole, but this is one of those presentations I think that warrants the opportunity for a bit of discussion. So by all means, at the bequest of the chair, I'm happy to answer questions during the presentation. So arguably, Colwood leads the West Shore in its commitment to the heritage planning function, as it is a core function of the municipality. Our strategic plan, the OCP, and the Heritage Commission bylaw chart a course to continue this leadership into 2021 through the creation of a comprehensive strategy and a new heritage registry. Staff and the Heritage Commission feel that establishing a strong vision for Colwood is an essential step to guide work in this area. So here it is. And this was developed through the facilitated sessions that we had with the Heritage Commission. I'll read it out here, that Colwood takes bold steps to protect its surviving built heritage resources and implements innovative approaches to conserve and celebrate its intangible heritage and historically important landscapes. By the year 2025, Colwood is widely viewed as a national leader in heritage conservation, and the community's understanding and support of what we have saved for future generations has generated significant pride of place. As you can see, the vision has 2 parts, guiding protection of built heritage, but as well intangible heritage and its connection to historic landscapes. So the first 2 aspects are what I'd like to talk about next. As we all know, Colwood's land and seascapes have changed quite a bit in the last 160 years. Here's an undated photo from Parks Canada that they shared on their social media as part of the recent 160 year anniversary of the creation of the Fiskard Lighthouse. In the background, you can see the lagoon neighborhood and portions of Hatley Park. And I thought this was a really interesting photo. This photo is actually even earlier, and I think, as far as I can tell, it's the earliest photo of Colwood. It's dated 1869, is in the BC archives. When comparing these first photographs of Colwood, and what would become our city, we can reflect on the sights of sound of today and ask ourselves what of the physical realm is important for retaining for the future. Are there specific landscape elements that provide tangible connections to our historical roots and a sense of place that are worth planning for, such they retain for future generations? These are questions that become more important for those who despair the any place character that many high growth communities are prone to take on. Next, I have a couple slides that try to highlight the idea of intangible heritage, which is invoked in the vision statement. In 2003, UNESCO defined intangible heritage as the practices, representations, expressions, knowledge, skills, as well as the instruments, objects, artifacts, and cultural spaces associated therewith that communities, groups, and in some cases individuals recognize as part of their cultural heritage. So as an example of this, I thought this was very fitting. This is a photo of the Battle of Colwood, or likely right after the Battle of Colwood, that was taken in 1912. Once again, this is from the BC Archives. This is actually one of 3 battles that saw local residents playing the role of enemy soldiers fighting to help prepare our soldiers for the very, very real battlefields of the First World War. These actually took place on what is now the lower sports fields of West Shore Parks and Recreation, which is also the site of one of Western Canada's premier horse racing venues in happier times. And this was actually one of the most technologically advanced horse racing tracks in the British Empire, actually. So it's quite a significant site. So these 2 examples of intangible heritage involving stories and knowledge that, despite not having a physical presence in the community, could be easily brought back to life through on-site interpretive installations. Such actions represent opportunities to bring meaning to the lives of our residents and deepen their sense of place. So this is an interesting one. This was actually taken in 1976, and it's a Colwood firefighter putting out a fire that erupted out of one of the rides at the Glen Comey Days celebrations. And I included this in the presentation tonight because it was shared by an online group that's representative of several that's come together to share stories like this online. Specifically, there's a Facebook group dealing with West Shore heritage that's quite prolific. And once again, this highlights an opportunity for us to leverage the work of the Heritage Commission and connect them with local community groups and to conserve intangible heritage through digital media, perhaps a more formal and meaningful format than a Facebook group. Next, I'd like to go back to the section of the report that provides an update on heritage planning activities. Page 2 of the report provides a list of 2020 accomplishments and the 2021 Heritage Commission work plan that calls for the creation of a comprehensive heritage strategy in the second quarter of this year, as per Council's existing direction. Currently, staff in the Heritage Commission are working with consultants to update the 1988 Heritage Inventory and set the stage for Council's consideration of a new heritage registry as per the official community plan. Staff will be proposing, as part of the 2021 budget deliberations, consideration of $60,000 for heritage planning activities that would include consulting dollars to help us with the comprehensive plan creation, as well as the registry. The money that's been budgeted or proposed to be budgeted is intended to provide sufficient technical heritage consulting services to complete the options for a heritage registry and strategy. Remaining monies, including a $10,000 core budget, are also proposed to be made available for heritage strategy implementation in the second half of 2021. And that the spending of that money would be as per council direction later this year. So example, this is a slide that kind of highlights what could be possible in terms of us considering future heritage. The Heritage Commission has already discussed, what should qualify as new heritage structures, because obviously we don't want to stay frozen in 1988. This slide shows the original plans and a recent photo of a house originally built in 1952, a house that was designed by architect John DeCastri, who is described by the University of Victoria as the penultimate West Coast designer. I'm sure some of you are familiar with his work. He designed many of Victoria's most prominent buildings, throughout the 20th century, but also several residences such as this and commercial buildings here in Colwood. The current owners of this house are seeking to protect the defining architectural elements of the structure, given its status within De Castries' historic portfolio. And just full disclosure, this is actually our CA. One of the owners of this house is our CAO. So do modern structures like this one warrant heritage planning attention? Does the community feel they should be protected? These are some of the questions that we seek to answer through the completion of the heritage strategy. Lastly, I'd like to mention that staff are recommending that council formally direct the Heritage Commission to explore partnering with the new Royal BC Museum as part of their new collections facility and potentially carving out a section specific to Colwood or the West Shore. And that's an idea that came from a Heritage Commission, and we'd like to put that forward to council for your input and potential formal direction. With that, I conclude my presentation with the recommendation that's in the report, and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So I do have 2 hands up, so I will go to Councillor Parkinson first. Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you, Worship. A couple of questions. One of the first ones was I was going to ask, what is intangible heritage? Because it wasn't a term I was familiar with, and you did an excellent job of explaining that, Ian, so I consider myself educated, so well done. Can you also give me a definition of the break between archaeological and heritage? Like, so much of the history of this part of the world is I would call archaeology versus heritage. How do you make that break? And why do you make that break?
Through the chair, within the legislation in BC, there's a date that's meant to define pre and post contact in the mid 1800s that defines when something falls under a certain section of the legislation. But for our purposes, we're really talking about settler heritage that's being discussed as part of the remit of the Heritage Commission. That's not to say that we have opportunities through the Heritage Commission to look at what would be defined as Indigenous heritage. I think there's no real reason to make an artificial distinction there, but we can use the term archaeology to look at settler heritage as well as Indigenous heritage. But for our purposes at this stage, we're really looking at remains and artifacts that are post mid 1800s.
Yeah, I guess, and again, I'll leave this to you and your committee to discuss. But to me, the heritage or the history of the community just gets even more interesting as we get further back in time. So I guess I'm disappointed that we're not looking at the whole spectrum of over the years. But as I said, I'll leave that to you and your experts to discuss. The other thing I would like maybe some more input from you is in the vision statement where you talk about becoming a national leader in heritage conservation. Pretty aspirational goal, and much as I'm justly proud of the heritage in Colwood, I mean, national leaders, you would think of places like Quebec City or Ottawa or Lewisburg or a whole bunch of places. Are you sure that's practical and realistic, or how do you envision achieving that?
Council commitment? Sorry, through the chair. No, in all honesty, I think that very lofty vision springs from the caliber of professionals we have in our Heritage Commission. We're really lucky to have I would argue, a nationally significant body of intelligence on that commission, and they're really keen to elevate the community with respect to our heritage function. So I would argue that it's reflective of what we're lucky to have in the commission right now.
Yeah, I remember the resumes of the people on that commission, and they were very much impressive. So, okay, thank you for that. I'm done, Your Worship.
Thank you. I will go to Councillor Kobayashi, then Councillor Day.
Okay, thank you very much, Your Worship. Part of my question has been answered. I was I'm trying to understand what national leader meant, but I also want to understand this other term in your vision statement so I clearly understand it. You say bold steps. So to me, that triggers some things in my head here, but what do we mean by bold steps? I mean, I thought we have an excellent body of people. I again looked at the resumes of all the people on your committee. You've got an outstanding committee. So what are bold steps? Like I thought we were doing a very professional job in the steps that we were taking to achieve this. But could you just explain what that means, and so that I have a clear understanding of the vision statement? Thank you.
Sure. Through the chair, I think the term bold steps was invoked because of the desire to act quickly to save the structures that are remaining in the 1988 heritage inventory. The fact remains that about half of the structures that were identified in 1988 have been lost. And I would argue that council's already taken some pretty bold steps by asking staff to highlight any of the remaining structures prior to a property owner acting on a building permit, demolition permit, or subdivision application. So in our world, that's a pretty bold step. And so we're hoping to continue that in that specific area of looking at the built heritage.
Okay, thank you very much, Ian.
Great. Thank you. Councillor Day.
Thank you. I'm just wanting to touch on the Indigenous heritage aspect because in my time on council, that's been quite important as well as somewhat contentious. And I know that due to COVID-19, a lot of our outreach to Indigenous leaders is on hold just because of the way it's difficult to meet in person right now. But it did come up both at Esquimalt Lagoon when we were envisioning some of the historical documentation that we were putting up down there. And it is really critical that we have Indigenous input into any historical progress that we make on the mid-1800s work. So I do think that's an important factor for us to include, but it will take time to develop. So it's really important that we get to those wonderful stories that the Indigenous culture may be willing to share with us, and do so in a respectful way, because as colonial settlers, we have a tendency to imagine that there was nothing here before we came. But of course, there's a lot, and a lot to learn from that. So I think it's really important that it's in here and acknowledged, and that we don't rush it, that we leave the door open. That's all.
Thank you, Councillor Day. I'm not seeing any other hands. So there is a recommendation that is in our report. Oh, I'm sorry, I do see a hand. So sorry, Councillor Parkinson, then Day. Councillor Parkinson.
Oh, sorry, I was going to move the recommendation, A, B, and C.
Great, thank you. Councillor Day, were you, sorry, I got to remove that. Were you going to second that? Is that what you were doing?
That's correct.
Great, thank you. That makes it much easier for me. So I'm going to clear everybody's hands. So I have a mover and seconder. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, I will call the question. Those in opposition? Nobody opposes. Mr. Borhill, thank you so much for that report. Moving on to bylaws. This is bylaw number 1816, land use, cannabis retail. There's a memorandum and an adoption. So there are two things that we need to do this evening. The first is recommendation number 1, and that is that the memorandum titled Final Adoption of Bylaw number 1816, Provincial Job 004227, RZ 20-001, rezoning of units 2020 at 310 Whale Road, site-specific text amendments to allow retail cannabis in bylaw in land use bylaw be received. So I need that motion. I'm going to assume Councillor Logan has moved it. Councillor Jansen has seconded it. I'm going to lower hands. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in opposition? Nobody opposes. Thank you. I'm not going to read the second recommendation. Well, oh, sure, since I read the first one and we have time. Recommendation number 2 is that bylaw number 1816, cited as Colwood Land Use Bylaw number 151, 1989, amendment number 172, cannabis retail, bylaw number 1816, 2020, be adopted. That is moved by Councillor Jansen, seconded by Councillor Baxter. Any discussion? Seeing none, I will call the question. Those in opposition? Nobody opposes. Looking for a motion to adjourn. Who got in first? Tonight, the winner goes to Councillor Logan. Congratulations, Councillor Logan. Any discussion around that? Seeing none, anyone in opposition? Nobody opposes. Thank you, everybody. We did it in 26 minutes. Well done. We'll see you next.
Happy New Year.